English made easy. Hey guys! Bored of those vocab lists? Me too. At 1 Degree North Companion, we're turning wordly wise into an adventure to make learning actually interesting. Let's jump in.
Today we're going to talk about a really dark chapter in American history, but we're not just going to look at dates and events, we're going to look at it through the words and the laws that were twisted to make it all happen.
All right, so let's just get right to the heart of it. This whole tragedy, it really all comes down to the power in side words like these. Civilized. Savage. I mean, who gets to decide who is who? And maybe more to the point, what happens when one group's definition of savage becomes a legal weapon used to tear down another group's entire civilization?
You know, to really get what was lost, we first have to understand what was there in the first place. So we're not going to start at the end of the trail. No, we're starting with the Cherokee Nation as it was, a truly thriving and established society.
You know, the word European settlers often used to describe the Cherokee was industrious. But honestly, that one word, it doesn't even begin to cover it. We're not talking about a primitive or nomadic society here, not at all. This was one of the 5 civilized tribes. I mean, we're talking about a nation with its own written language, a constitution that was actually modeled on the US Constitution, and they even had their own national newspaper. They were farmers, they were politicians, writers, they were building a stable modern life on the land they had lived on for generations.
And here's what's so crucial to understand. This wasn't just, an opinion someone had. It was a legal fact. The United States government itself had officially acknowledged the Cherokee Nation as a separate country. They signed legally binding treaties with them, treaties that recognized their sovereignty. This was all on paper, official.
But all of that formal recognition, all of that ink on paper acknowledging their civilization, it offered absolutely no protection. In fact, you could say it set the stage for one of the most devastating betrayals in this nation's history.
So how did this betrayal actually get built? Well, the pressure to remove the Cherokee was intense. It had reached a fever pitch, especially after gold was discovered on their land. But here's the thing. This removal wasn't going to be a simple military conquest. No, it was designed to look legal. And in this whole drama, the weapons, they weren't just guns. They were words. Words that were twisted, redefined, and aimed with deadly precision.
Okay, so the first weapon, the concept of authority. Think about it. Who really has the right to speak for an entire people? Who can legally sign away the lands and the rights of a whole nation? This would become the linchpin for the entire deception.
The second weapon was the agent. The U.S. government sends in one person, a representative, whose job it is to act on their behalf and get a deal done. But this agent, he wasn't just a messenger. He was a tool, a mechanism for a much larger policy.
And then you have the third weapon, which is almost tragically ironic. It was the supposed power the Cherokees had in these treaties, the right to evict illegal settlers from their own land. But what good is a right on paper if you can't enforce it? It was a hollow promise.
All of this leads us to the final and maybe most devastating weapon of all, a treaty that was, for all intents and purposes, a total sham. A piece of paper designed to look official, to feel legal, but at its core, it was a complete lie.
So here's how they put it all together. It's a kind of legal deception. An agent from the government goes and finds a small, unauthorized group of Cherokee, a group with no real authority to represent their nation. He gets them to sign a treaty, and then the U.S. government takes this sham document and uses it as the legitimate legal basis to evict an entire nation of nearly 20,000 people.
But, this whole legal fiction, it didn't go unchallenged. The Cherokee Nation fought back. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And in doing so, they put not just their land on trial, but the very idea of American justice itself.
And this set up a truly historic showdown. You had the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on one side, who looked at this so-called treaty and called it what it was, a complete sham. And on the other side, you had President Andrew Jackson, who was absolutely infuriated that the court would dare to stand in his way.
And President Jackson's alleged response says it all, really. He supposedly said, "The Chief Justice has made his decision, now let him enforce it." Now just think about that. He wasn't just disagreeing with a ruling, he was openly challenging the power of an entire branch of government. This was a full-blown constitutional crisis, a moment where the president basically declared that his will was above the law.
So once the president defies the court like that, the legal fight is over. It's done. And the cost of that defiance, well, it wasn't going to be measured in legal arguments anymore.
It was going to be measured in human lives. And those weren't just idle words from the president. Almost exactly 2 years after that sham treaty was signed, 2,000 U.S. soldiers, heavily armed, showed up on Cherokee land to enforce an agreement that the Supreme Court had already said was illegitimate. What happened next was just horrific. The roundup and forced removal of nearly 20,000 Cherokee people. They were literally herded from their homes, forced onto a brutal 900-mile journey. And what's worse, because of government mismanagement and delays, this whole trek was pushed into the dead of winter. So this journey, mostly on foot, it became a death march through snow and freezing rain.
4,000. That's the number. That's the estimate of how many people died on that journey. And they didn't die in battle. They died from pneumonia, from starvation, from freezing in the bitter cold. That number, that is the direct human cost of a legal sham and a president's defiance.
And it's so important to see the distinction here. 4,000, that's an estimate. It's an approximation. But what is absolutely certain, what is not an estimate, is the devastating reality behind that number. We're talking about the loss of mothers, fathers, children, the loss of an entire generation, the loss of a future.
Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started. Back to the words and the laws that were supposed to protect people, but instead were used to destroy them.
The story of the Trail of Tears leaves us with a really profound and honestly a very unsettling question. When the very systems designed to provide justice are instead used to create a sham, what is the path to true justice? And that's not just a question about the past, is it? It echoes right into our present, every single time we see laws being used in ways that seem to go against their whole purpose.
So I want to leave you with this final thought, a kind of task. Think about these 3 words: impartial, irrelevant, and acknowledge. If you were the judge, how would you write a ruling on that 1835 treaty using those words? How would you be impartial? What facts would you acknowledge? And which arguments would you declare completely irrelevant? It really makes you wonder, how can words, after they've been used as weapons, ever be reclaimed for justice?
Hope you guys enjoyed that last lesson. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Ready for more? The next one starts right now.
You've probably heard someone called a dodo, right? And, it's never a compliment. But what if I told you that behind that simple insult is a deep, centuries-old mystery, a story about a creature so strange, so unbelievable, that for the longest time, the world couldn't even decide if it was real? This is that story. I mean, just look at some of the first drawings that made their way to Europe. You see this bird with its huge, comical-looking bill, a round body, and this little puff of a tail. It's easy to see why people were skeptical. For hundreds of years, the question was just hanging in the air. Is this a real animal, or did someone just have a really wild imagination? And that really was the core of the whole debate. On one side, you had people convinced the dodo was just a figment, a made-up story from some sailor's tall tale. And on the other, those who insisted it was authentic, a genuine living creature. The world was completely torn, and believe it or not, it would take centuries to finally settle the argument. So let's dive into that disbelief. How does a real flesh-and-blood animal get turned into a legendary beast, something you'd expect to see in a book of myths? Well, it all goes back to just how bizarre those very first encounters really were. For the people in Europe seeing these strange sketches, the dodo seemed completely mythical, as imaginary as a dragon or a unicorn. There was just nothing else in their world that looked remotely like it. It was an animal that just didn't seem to fit. Yeah, you can almost hear them talking about it, looking at these drawings of a bird bigger than a swan, with its gray feathers and that massive bill, and just shaking their heads. The general feeling was, no way, this has to be a figment of someone's imagination. It's just too weird to be real. But here's the thing. The dodo was very, very real. And its authentic story, well, it doesn't start in a dusty old book. It begins on an isolated island paradise. A paradise that was about to be completely and utterly shattered. This timeline, when you really look at it, is just staggering. For thousands and thousands of years, the dodo is thriving, no problems. Then 1507, the first humans arrive. And by 1681, it's gone. Gone. In just over 170 years, a species that had existed for millennia was completely wiped out. The sheer speed of it is the heart of the tragedy. And the key to understanding the dodo, both its success and its downfall, is this idea of complete solitude. On this remote island of Mauritius, it evolved for ages with basically no threats. And that peaceful isolation shaped everything about it, its size, its behavior, its very nature. See, what's so crucial to understand is that there were no predatory animals on the island. The dodo literally had no concept of being hunted. So when humans and their animals showed up, they weren't just a new species. They were the island's first true predators, an absolutely unimaginable threat. And suddenly, the dodo was facing a war on two fronts. First, sailors hunted the adult birds, which were totally unafraid and couldn't fly away. But just as devastating were the animals the sailors brought with them, their pigs, dogs, and monkeys. They launched a second attack, one aimed directly at the next generation. These new animals began to scavenge all over the island, looking for absolutely anything to eat. Now, the mother dodo laid only a single egg at a time, right there on the ground. Her nest was totally defenseless. So these new arrivals just devoured the eggs, one by one, effectively erasing the dodo's entire future. It's this very vulnerability that led to the dodo's lasting reputation as a foolish or stupid bird. But was it? Was it really not smart? Let's unpack that myth, because behind that derogatory label is a creature that was actually perfectly adapted to its world. I mean, even its name was an insult. The word dodo probably comes from a Portuguese word for a foolish person. It's a derogatory name right from the start, meant to express a low opinion. This bird was tragically misjudged from the very moment humans decided to name it. And the common idea was that it was just plain ungainly, clumsy and awkward. Because it couldn't fly, because it couldn't run fast, people judged it. But they weren't judging it based on its success in the world it knew, but on its failure to survive in a new world that had been forced upon it. But this is the twist. Its so-called ungainly nature wasn't a flaw at all. It was actually a masterpiece of evolution, perfectly suited for an environment without enemies. In fact, modern science has shown us that the dodo's brain-to-body size ratio was pretty similar to a modern pigeon, which, by the way, are known to be quite intelligent. The dodo wasn't foolish, it was just trusting. And there's the tragic irony. The very things that made the dodo so successful in its world made it fatally vulnerable in ours. Its fearlessness, its single egg on the ground, its flightless body, these were once advantages. But when its home was invaded, those same traits left it completely, hopelessly open to attack. So when that last dodo was seen around 1681, what happened next? What did it leave behind? Well, the legacy of its extinction is just as strange and just as tragic as its life was. You're not going to believe this, but after the dodo disappeared, that original doubt actually came back. Its extinction was so fast, so absolute, that for nearly 200 years, people started to wonder all over again if the whole thing had just been a mythical story from the beginning. Finally, the debate was put to rest for good in 1889. That's when a huge number of dodo bones were found preserved in a swamp on Mauritius. This was the hard, authentic proof the world had been missing. The dodo was, without a shadow of a doubt, real. And these skeletons, these relics, they're pretty much all we have left. In one final, heartbreaking piece of this story, the world's last complete stuffed dodo specimen, which was at Oxford, was ordered to be burned in 1755 because it was decaying. Only its head and one of its feet were saved from the flames. All of this forces us to completely reconsider our judgment of this bird. Was the dodo really not astute, not intelligent? Or was it simply a creature that was perfectly adapted to one kind of world and just tragically unprepared for a totally different one that arrived without any warning? The dodo's story isn't just some historical tragedy, though. It's a lesson, a powerful warning that echoes through time. You see, the dodo was so connected to its home that its extinction almost caused another. A tree, the Calvaria tree, relied on the dodo to eat its seeds so they could germinate. When the dodo died, the forest itself almost died with it. So that makes you think, doesn't it? The dodo lived in its own isolated paradise, completely vulnerable to sudden change. Which makes us ask, what creatures today are living in those same kinds of conditions? just one mistake, one invasive species away from facing the exact same fate. So, I'll leave you with a mission. If you had to write an authentic defense of the dodo, to argue against that old, derogatory reputation, what would you say? Looking back at everything we've talked about, its solitude, its vulnerability, its misunderstood nature, which 3 words would you pick to finally tell its true story? It's a question that asks not just what we've already lost, but what we all stand to lose next.
Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. I'll see you in the next one.